Good evening and welcome. My name is Justin Continica. I'm the young adult librarian at the Ridgewood Public Library. Tonight with me, we have Jeanne Marron, Dr. Jeanne Marron. She's a clinical specialist and community educator for West Bergen Mental Health Care. And tonight she's doing a presentation for getting a jumpstart to living on your own. So this is for teens who are getting ready to move to college in a couple of years, or maybe in a couple of months, as well as folks who are graduating college and moving on like into the adult world. So this is a perfect time to kind of do this and see. If you are attending or viewing this webinar, it is being recorded, so we will have it available for you as soon as we can. And if you are interested, we also have two other programs coming up with Dr. Marron. For January 4th, we're doing Under Pressure, the Stress Factor and Building Resilience before transitioning to college. And our third one is on February 1st, and it's Mental Health and Wellness Awareness for Teens. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Marron. And if you have any questions, please feel free to use our chat box as well as our Q&A feature. I will be monitoring it throughout her presentation, and we'll save some time towards the end for any questions that you may have. Okay, onwards to you, Dr. Marron.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Justin. And thank you to the Ridgewood Library for hosting this evening's program on getting a jump start to living on your own. As mentioned, I'm Dr. Jeanne Marron from West Bergen Mental Health Care, which is in Ramsey and Ridgewood, New Jersey. You may be familiar with us, and you can see our website is here on the slide, so feel free to visit. Basically, this evening, I want to focus on what the journey ahead is going to be like for all of the adolescents and young adults that might be tuning into this. One of the things that's going to really be kind of the end goal, so it's the focus throughout this entire talk this evening, is how do we optimize autonomy? And autonomy is, we think of people being independent in this world of wanting to kind of, children want to grow up and become independent teens and adults. And the bottom line is none of us are really independent. We're interdependent on our lives with different people without being dependent, in a unhealthy way. We are, in fact, always pretty much interdependent because we live in community, we live in families, we live in neighborhoods. So the term that I really like to focus on is autonomy. How do you become the most autonomous person you can be, the most self-sufficient you can be, and order to be successful in these transitions that lie ahead for you. And the key to that is this third bullet here, saying the role of preparation, preparing, planning ahead, moving forward, taking the step of watching this. And as we go through, really thinking to yourself, oh, yeah, that was one of the skills mentioned that might be helpful later on. I think that's one I need to work on now in developing. So tonight is really about presenting some thoughts and ideas about what helps to optimize autonomy in the long run, and the different skills and strategies that might help you move towards optimizing autonomy, and how important it is to prepare in the meantime on your way. So what is the journey ahead for those of you that are late teens and young adults, either maybe preparing to transition from your home life with your family, going out to college, or maybe you're wrapping up college and thinking about what's next in terms of getting an apartment, full-time employment, things like that. So that journey is very complex. It really involves a lot, because at the same time, when you're considering all those things, you're also in the process just developmentally of consolidating your own identity. There's different kind of, part of early adolescence and throughout adolescence, young adulthood, there's this component of kind of trying on different values and belief systems and learning more skills and developing talents that help inform our identity. And it is a really important time for teens and young adults during the kind of primal development of the frontal lobe here, this part of your brain, to develop your identity. And in that, you develop a stronger sense of self. So those are two really important pieces that I wanted to kind of bring forward first, because we're not necessarily going to talk about all the tasks of how that happens tonight, but I want to kind of recognize that there's a lot of other things that you're developing and getting better at in terms of who you are as a person, independent and autonomous in this world, interdependent and autonomous in this world. So towards that end, we are going to talk though about more about developing independent living skills and what they are. I've put them in some categories so you can do some self-assessment on that. We're going to talk about the life phase that you're in right now. This phase of life for you, you have a profuse amount of learning going on, of skill development, your talents, interests, so many things are just profusely developing inside you. And a lot of that has to do with your brain development that's going on right now. There's two phases of life where brain development is, really significant compared to every other phase of life. And that's the toddler years and the teen years. And the teen years, it's because the frontal lobe, which is the area behind your forehead, and the most complex part of our brains, it's the part of our brains that does things like, I don't know, problem solving, gets humor that's kind of really witty and not just slapstick, that is able to anticipate consequences, make judgments, kind of coordinate all the other things that our brain can do. And that part of our brain, that most advanced brain, we call it our executive functions, because it does things like help us organize and plan and make judgments, as I said. That part of our brain isn't fully developed in males till on average about 30, and in females on average to late 20s. So that's what I mean by the fact that there's a profuse development in learning and skills going on right now, and that's related to that brain development. It's also a time where you're in a lot of transitions. So you might be transitioning to higher ed, from high school to college, from a 2-year school to a 4-year school, maybe from a 4-year school to graduate school. So there's a lot of transitions in terms of moving on in higher education. Or for others, it might be moving on to the workforce. Or for others, it might be some combination of one or the other. And yet for others still, it might be just that you're wanting to achieve, even if you're not necessarily moving yet out on your own, but even in the space that you are in with your family life, that you want to achieve a higher level of autonomy within that space, and therefore kind of develop more of these independent living skills so you're better prepared when you do go off. Other things that are part of this journey that you're on right now, this phase of your life, is really expanding on your ability to express yourself, to advocate for yourselves, to take responsibility, to do things that I talked about in terms of the frontal lobe development, like problem solve, make good decisions, cope, become more accountable, make reparations in relationships, perhaps. And your social relationships do become much more complex. They're more likely more different types of social relationships that you have. And within those, or across those, either way, they're likely to be much more complex, and some of them much more nuanced too. So there's a lot more of connecting within your friendship circle, but also you have a much broader social world now. If you're on campus yet, or if you're in a high school and you're looking at schools, you're going to maybe encounter thousands of people in this new community. So there's a lot of different connections. You'll have connections with the community you came from, but you're also going to be developing a lot of new connections in the communities that you're going to connect with down the road. So that's a big part of the journey during this time of life for you. And also using your leisure time, that changes a lot at this stage of your life. You're no longer being enrolled by your parents in activities, or signed up for play dates, when you're a very young child. But you're choosing the kinds of activities that you want to try out. You're choosing how to use your recreational and leisure time. And there's a lot of possibilities to explore in that area. And of course, it's a really important time, and we're going to talk about this a lot in the January program, but it's a incredible opportunity for you to develop further your self-care, your ability to kind of be aware of who and how you are in every aspect of how you are, medically, mental health, in practical terms, and how to take care of yourself, as well as being able to take care of maybe the eventual connections that you make and families you may have someday. So towards that goal, I invite you to kind of go through the rest of the program with me with keeping some of these things in mind. I want you, the next few slides are some things that I'd like you to start considering for yourselves. And one way to think about this is goals. Some people really like to talk about goals. Oh, I have this goal in my life. So that's one way to do it, to think about, there's not just one goal, but hopefully you have a few primary goals. And then you hopefully have some additional goals as well. Another way, though, to approach looking at goals is to ask yourself this question, to kind of take some time tonight, tomorrow, sometime in the next week, to literally kind of sit down, relax, and think about what you imagine your life to be in 10 years. And really think about all different aspects of it in 10 years. Where are you living? Where do you see yourself living? Geographically, what part of the country do you think you'll be living in 10 years? What kind of abode will you be in? Will it be an apartment, a house? Will it be shared? Will you be on your own? What will your role be where you are in 10 years? Will you be a caretaker? Will you be in a job or a career? What role will you have in your family life that you come from now, or perhaps other family life down the road? What role will you have in your neighborhood, your community, your various activities, to kind of, see yourself there, your civic role. There's lots of different roles. And then also consider, what do you see in 10 years, the kind of relationships that you'll have? What are the types of relationships you really want to have in your life and that you value? How do you see yourself in 10 years taking care of yourself, or maybe of others, or being good to your and nurturing your interpersonal commitments, your close relationships? And how do you see yourself in terms of being sufficient, being that autonomous person that I talked about, and living, lastly, kind of, are you in 10 years at that point? Can you imagine yourself living intentionally? Okay, within your values, something you designed and by your intention? Is that going to happen for you? So if you can imagine that, try to do that, like think about it in 10 years, and then back up. Okay, that's where I want to be in 10 years. Where do I need to be in 5 years? All right. And then where do I need to be next year to be on my way to this? So that's another way to kind of look at what your goals and objectives might be, is to kind of imagine where you want to get to. And then that is, well, you may not get there. Your plans may change. Definitely. I'm going to tell you, across some of these years, it's not going to go exactly how you imagine at all. Plans are going to change. Life changes. Look at the pandemic, the curve that threw all of us. So things will change, but still having that in mind, that kind of set of goals, the life plan, you can start then to think about, what are the steps I need to take now to start getting there? Because, think about it, when you I'm not sure if all of you drive that are on here and listening, but if you're a driver now, if you're a teen that drives or a young adult who drives, that was probably a goal of yours that had to really take a lot of steps to get to. What did you have to do? Well, first you had to study for your permit. You had to take the permit test. You had to pass that. Then you had to probably take some kind of driver education, and then you had to have someone help you practice until you achieved the goal of driving well enough to pass the test. And then there was even probably, if you have if you're on the younger side, there was probably even restrictions on your license that you had to attend to. So there was a lot of steps you had to go through. And think of these goals, these big autonomy goals that you're going to have, as being something that might be, say, on the top of the staircase, and we're think about where you are now. Maybe you're only at 1 or 2 steps up. You can't get to the top of the stairwell in one big jump. And often stairwells of life aren't straight. Sometimes they're crooked. They're more like Escher's or Harry Potter's. But so they're not always straight, those stairwells, and they can change and they can spiral. So keep in mind that there's going to be a lot of steps, and sometimes even those steps will need to be adjusted here and there. But the important thing is to start thinking about it and start working on these things now. So other things to start considering is, when I talk about the skills and things, what practical things may be important to you to achieve your goal? If you're seeing yourself, living in LA in a multi-million-dollar house, well, a practical thing is you need to be a really good income earner. But, or let's say you see yourself in 10 years as a parent of multiple children, a young parent having multiple children. That's a lot of skills to learn, parenting and caretaking. And then, what other kinds of skills do you need to learn to enhance or to alter? So you may have some of the skills, but maybe you need to kind of learn how to adapt them. So how is your ability to adapt? How is your flexibility? Are you working on that? Because you're going to be successful in relationships and your living situation and employment and all those things in autonomous living. A lot of flexibility is required. So that's another area to practice. And what are your strengths? What do you know your strengths to be? Capitalize on them now and use them in this process, because they're going to be really, really helpful. And do you see yourself maybe hopefully developing other strengths in the future? So keep that in mind as we go through this. Also try starting to consider, as we go through each of the life skill areas and, kind of moving forward in living independently or autonomously, is what are your needs versus what are your preferences? We all would like to have a number of things, but they're not necessarily our needs. So for example, those of you that may have already gone off to college, and some schools are much better in this day and age, but some schools have very, very small dorm rooms, very, that are shared space. So, while you may have preferred to bring a lot of items from home with you, you really couldn't, because the need to fit everything in that small space was different than your preference. So try to make sure that you're understanding that, needs are very different than what you desire or prefer to happen. And it's important to know both. It's important to know what you need to be successful, to thrive, and what you would prefer to have as well while you're thriving. And both of those are things to work on achieving, but the needs need to come before the preferences in most instances. So when you're considering moving forward, let's say you're going to go off to college, you're going to move out of your current living space, you're going to get a full-time job, or maybe you're going to stay in your current living space, but maybe make it so that you're more autonomous while in your family home. Think about, what do you believe your needs will be to assist you when you're making that move, to assist you once you make that move so that you can thrive. Think about your individual needs and your preferences, and be sure to separate the two, as I mentioned, what are needs and what are preferences. But go through these kind of bigger categories. What do you need to learn? What are your preferences to learn? What do you need in terms of healthcare? Do you have a medical condition or a mental health condition that maybe your parent has been playing a significant role in making those medical appointments, picking up your medication, paying your co-pays, things like that, that, you could start to step up taking care of your own health needs, as well as your own health preferences, your safety, your finances, and all kinds of practical things like the independent living skills of managing your space and your money, and your organizational skills, all the kinds of we're going to go through menus of skills that you can kind of figure out for yourself. What do I need to learn of these, and what would I prefer to learn to get better at? So think about that in terms of 2 levels as well. All right, so the journey, what's next? Are you going to go for employment? Are you going to go for some kind of maybe pre-college or life skills program? And then if you're haven't gone off to college yet, are you going to maybe go to a community college? Now, some people live at community colleges. most commute? Are you going to go to a 4-year college? And then again, some people commute, some people live at, many people live at, you know, a 4-year school. Are you maybe done finishing college and you're going to go to a master's program? Is it going to be where you'll be living home again after maybe having lived, you know, away at school? There's a lot of possibilities there. You know, and then are you going to technical or trade school? Or maybe you're going to do some type of apprenticeship or a vocational training program. And there's definitively other possibilities. The what's next is very open right now for many of you. So, but when you're thinking of each of these things, keep in mind, are you going to be doing it part-time or full-time? Because the skills you need will vary based on that. And then are you going to be doing it while living in your family home or in a dorm or on your own? Because again, these skills we're going to talk about tonight, how many you really have to master, and would be determined by those factors, whether you're doing them full-time or part-time, or where you're going to live while you're doing them. And also the skills that we're going to talk about, some of them need a little bit of practice. Some of them are easily learned. Others, you know, they do take practice to kind of master. So keeping that in mind, it's even more important that you try to start learning some of the ones that you may self-assess yourselves as needing to kind of develop more skill in. So what are they? Here's some big categories. So the first one is personal independent living skills. These are skills that are related to kind of the management of you as a person. And that first one I've already made mention of a little bit is the medical and health. You know, how much do you manage your own medical and health profile? How much do you, you know, for some people, managing their health may be minimal. They may get a physical once a year and not need to do anything else. For others, they may have an illness that is chronic or intermittent, and they may need to reach out to medical experts, and they may be on medications. There's many, many variants, or it could be a very significant medical or health issue that needs to be managed. So asking yourself, how well do you know your own medical history, your own medical profile? Are you able to kind of report that accurately in a new medical setting if you were need to do? And then simple things like, you know, taking care of your own nutrition. You know, if you were preparing your own meals, would you know how to do that? Would you know how to shop? Would you know how to eat a balanced diet? Would you know what things might contain an allergen that you have? So being able to approach your own nutrition, and with that, I should have had hydration up there too. A big thing that can sometimes happen with students early on in their college time is a lot of students end up in the medical facility at the campus because of dehydration, not kind of being reminded to drink a lot of fluids. So hydration is also important. Hygiene, you know, your hygiene, your basic hygiene and your appearance. Most teens, by the time they're launching, kind of have these things down, but some people also still need to work on their hygiene. I think it's probably an issue post like pandemic, because a lot of people have you know, been showing up on virtual programs, you know, with their pajama pants on. So realizing that you have to like put a full outfit on to go out is maybe a new challenge for many of us, but and I'm not wearing pajama pants, so you know. But your appearance and your self-presentation, that's a very important personal skill. And it kind of stinks to say this, you know, people might say, but how we appear and present ourselves with how we, you know, do our hair or coat or, you know, dress in terms of clothes and things, shouldn't matter. And, you know, you're 100% right, it shouldn't matter. But in the college and work world, employment world, it does make an impression. So how you present yourself does make an impression. The good news is that you can manage your own impression. We call that impression management. There's a lot of skills that you can learn how to manage your impression that you make on others in different kinds of environments. And if any of you are into drama, that's a great technique to use to work on self-presentation and impression management, because you can act in different roles and you can kind of dramatize going for the job interview, or how you'll maybe present to a professor who disappointed you with the grade they handed down, something like that. Your sleep-wake cycle, there's not going to be anybody reminding you to, get up or go to sleep. I remember the first time, and I'm pretty old, but the first time I went away to school, that, I no longer had my father would sometimes walk up a couple stairs and just knock on the back of the wall where he knew my head was in our house. And, if I had started to oversleep. So there might not be anybody there. Are you capable of kind of providing your own intellectual stimulation? If you're going to move out of your home, and especially if you're going to be alone or with people you don't know very well initially, how are you going to pursue intellectual stimulation for yourself? And also, how good are you at calming yourself down, at emotional and self-regulation? How good are you at coping with various things? We're going to talk a lot about how to self-regulate in January. Interpersonal skills, social skills, how do you talk to a professor or a boss versus, or a landlord that's angry, versus your friend. Recreation and leisure time, another important personal task. Good self-care always involves being able to have valued recreation and downtime or leisure time, valued activities and valued social connections. Safety, are you a good judge of what is required for you to be safe in any kind of environment? And then how can you manage all these things that you're going to be going through? So everything that's involved with moving forward at this point for the next 10 years at least, or 5 years at least, are going to involve a lot of change. Going off to school, starting jobs. There's going to be multiple jobs you'll probably start in the next 5 to 10 years. Living in different places, meeting new people. All those things are life changes. They're significant life changes. And stress basically comes from change. That's all it is. And we're going to talk about that next time. But change equals stress. So all these independent living skills that are required for you to kind of enhance to be successful in these changes, they do create stress. It creates stress. And so how do you manage your stress? How good are you managing stress now? And what is your plan to continue to manage it well in the future? Because it's going to be a lot more of it. And it's not bad stress. As defining stress as change, also kind of sheds lights on the fact that positive things can be stressful. So maybe 10 years from now, you pictured yourself, in a relationship, perhaps even coupled or married. And that planning to be married is a huge stressor, even though it's positive. Going away to school, huge stressor, even though it's positive. Moving in to your own place, huge stressor, even though it's positive. So just keep that in mind. Stress isn't something that connotes negative things happening in your life. In fact, many positive things involve change in our life, but that automatically stresses our brains and our body. And I'll explain that next time in January. But being able to manage that stress is one of the best self-care tools that you can learn. Time management, those of you that maybe that's something you struggle with, or organizational skills to date, those are going to be really important as you kind of proceed to be more autonomous. Having, your bills paid at time, getting to class on time, breaking down big projects in college or grad school into the smaller component parts, and doing each of them all along the way. It's going to be challenging. And these are things that for some of us, parents did some of that when you were younger. So being able to kind of do more of that for yourself and getting really good with your time management and your organizational skills are going to be really helpful. transportation. So are you driving yet? If not, do you know how to use transportation? And do you have a backup plan for driving? Let's say you are living independently and and you're working full time, or you're maybe living off campus and you do need your car to get to campus. And your car, is a little bit old. It's okay. It's functioning most of the time, but there's some problems here and there with it. So having a backup plan, for some of these skills is really important. Maybe the car isn't going to work on the day of your final. So do you know how to take the bus, or do you have a friend that you can kind of, catch a ride with? To have some kind of alternate plan. So use of transportation is really important, and access to it, and having plan Bs for how you're going to connect to places. Right now, a lot of people are connecting virtually, so it's a little bit easier, but eventually those are going to be really important skills again too. Asking for help. What I find is that a lot of teens and young adults, when they're going through this tremendous amount of change, and transitions, all these transitions, that they really pride themselves on being successful and capable. And sometimes, and that's all true, well, that's all true, sometimes the simultaneous truth is that we all need a little help. And I do see that many teens and young adults sometimes kind of hesitate to ask for help, or maybe don't at all. And it's such an important strategy to learn. Knowing when to ask for help and guidance is just an incredibly important skill. Certainly, you don't want to be overly dependent, right? You're trying to become autonomous and constantly ask for help and rely and be overly dependent on people. But you want to be able to be interconnected enough and comfortable enough to ask for help when it's needed. Similar to also, how good are you at dealing with the unexpected? When plan A goes wrong, does that just unravel you and get you kind of dysregulated, so then you have to put the stress management strategies back in place? Or are you kind of learn to be flexible and adaptable, and are you adept at dealing with the unexpected? You might not be as adept as you'd like to be because your life experience hasn't been quite at the level that someone who is out living independently is, but that's what you're working towards. Your problem solving skills, I'm going to give you a problem solving model at the end of the slides, and so that you can use that to enhance those skills. And how good are you at anticipating outcomes? Kind of, rather than just having a knee-jerk response, kind of like thinking ahead, like if I do A, then B, C, or D might happen, but if I do B, then hopefully G will happen, and I really want G to happen. So, being able to anticipate, kind of think about things hypothetically, anticipate outcomes, and weigh them in your problem solving is really important to be able to learn to do. And coping with emergencies, those unknowns, those unexpected can be emergencies. So this goes to my organizational skills. At times I've had to learn the hard way to get better at it, because if you don't, people can really pile up. Other types of independent living skills are things to do with whatever your living situation will be, your household will be, whether you're living with family, you're living in a dorm, you're living in an apartment near a school, or maybe you're in a shared house or apartment because you're working. Many possibilities, but related to that living space, there's going to be a number of other skills that are really important to make sure that you have down. Now, some of you may already know how to cook and do food prep, but if you don't, I think it's time to start hanging around your family's kitchen and learning. Are you aware of how to furnish living space? And making sure that things will fit not just in the living space that you're getting it for, but are they going to fit through the hallways and through the doorways that particular furniture has to come through. Shopping, being able to shop for all your necessities, doing laundry, cleaning, organizing your space, using your any equipment or appliances you might have. And then also, you know, how to let go of things. That can be sometimes hard. Again, I gave that example of, you know, sometimes it's hard for students going off to college that they can't bring everything they want with them, all their comfort items and things, and their good memory items, because there's just no space for it. You know, and they're storing them at mom's, but then maybe your dad's or whatever, but then maybe you're moving into your own place and you have plenty of room and you accumulate a lot of goofy things, a lot of awesome things, and it's time to move again, and you're moving into a smaller space with some friends. So what do you do with all these things you've accumulated? So letting go of things, learning how to let go of things is really important too. Communication skills. I know that the teens and young adults today are really good with the devices, with the first one here. I don't think that that's really as much of an issue, you know, the phone and email, computer, text, mail, virtual platforms, all that. However, you know, using that solely as your way to connect is going to impact the quality of your relationship. So keep that in mind. When you do move on, there's two things that you're going to want to do. You want to really continue the relationships that you had in the past place you lived before you move. So that might be your family, your neighbors, close friends in that area. But also you're going to want to connect with the people in your new place. So maybe you moved 3 states away to go to college. You want to connect with those people. So while right now we're overly reliant on the virtual platform to connect with anyone, once that's no longer necessary, it is really important to connect by voice, like on a phone, or face to face, to have both the kinds of contact that seems more kind of real than doing it through the devices. Social media also, I'm sure that your generation is aware of the digital print that they can make and how it doesn't necessarily ever go away, and what digital citizenship is. But if not, it's really important before you're kind of off on your own and under peer pressure, you know, to do some things with social media that maybe isn't so smart to do in terms of the job interview you go on next, or anything. What you say, but also your nonverbal communication skills are really important, especially when you're in a situation where you're seeking employment, or you're trying to maybe talk to a professor on campus about something that isn't working for you. So thinking about not just what you say, but how you say it can make a huge difference. Conversation skills, how are your communication skills? Maybe they're great regularly, you know, on an ongoing basis, but how are they when you're in an emotionally charged situation? You know, if you're upset, do you have difficulty, you know, communicating during that, or do you maybe over communicate during those kinds of times? So kind of learning your own communication styles and learning how to adjust that to various contexts is also important. Being flexible, learning how to filter things, your thoughts, because of your profuse brain development right now, all seem amazingly important, but they're not all of value to everyone you see. So being able, that frontal lobe, that part of your brain I talked about up here, that's actually your filter that's still developing, and it's kind of developing a sense of telling you to just think that to yourself and tell your friend later, or no, you're going to say it right now. That's a filter, and that's part of that frontal lobe development that's going on for you right now. Learning norms and expectations in your new environment. So you're in an apartment building, you know, and maybe there's a lot of young families there. It's not okay to, you know, every night have loud music till 2 a.m, or maybe even vacuum at 10 o'clock at night. You know, kind of understanding the norms and expectations of your community. You know, your roommate at college, you know, if you're always kind of throwing your things in the middle of the floor and they're tend to be more of a neat person, that could cause some interpersonal challenges. So being aware of what the expectations of the relationships are that you're in, but also the norms of the environment that you're in. How to deal with emergencies and communicating. Again, that's the emotionally charged situation in communicating. Are you clear when there's an emergency? Do you know what to do and who to communicate to in an emergency? Do you kind of have those numbers readily available, even if your cell phone dies or isn't with you? Are you carrying them in a wallet or something? Lots of possible things to do if you're going to be kind of going out on your own, away from your family, in terms of preparing for communication in emergencies. Self-disclosure. This is big because, I think it's challenging. People want to be open. They want to get to know other people. And part of that is disclosing a lot of information about oneself. But once you're kind of out on your own, there's a lot more opportunity for people to ask for very personal information. So thinking ahead of time about your comfort level with disclosing personal information versus public information is really important. It's just like dating or, any kind of sexual behavior in dating. You should think ahead and know your limits, like what you want to share and not share, and what you're willing to do or not do. These are things that are really important to kind of think ahead about. In the excitement of the moment with a new friend, or a great conversation with somebody random on the phone that called you about, a paper you both are working on for a class that you don't really know. And the excitement of that, we might make a different decision as to what we disclose. So think about that. You need to think ahead that some information really needs to stay private for your own safety. And, I think you're talking with your parents about like what kind of information that is. There's basics, Social Security number, there's certain information that's the basics, but making sure you kind of go over that with family. And also, that goes back up to the social media. You might want to be aware of how much you expose your life and where you are and what you're doing through social media. So kind of keeping that in mind, that social media is a form of disclosure. So just keep that in mind as well. And also being aware that what you disclose and to who is really in part determined by the relationship you're in with that person at the time. And then self-advocacy, there's going to be some situations where in the past, your family, your parents probably have advocated for you. You couldn't, there's a rule that you're cut if you miss like one practice, but you're only going to miss 10 minutes of it. And maybe they advocated, that you could still stay on the team or something like that. There's going to be times now where going forward to be autonomous, and when you're out on your own, living independently, you're going to have to advocate for yourself. So making sure that you've learned how to do that is really important. Communication skills are really important about that. So another whole section is independent living skills and financial management. From the basics of how good are you with math and money handling, to budgeting, to paying your bills, to knowing how important it is to have some kind of backup, but kind of a rescue fund, as well as some savings, what debt is and how to avoid accumulating too much of it, planning financially for your future, what kinds of banking there is, and how to choose a bank. Same thing with credit cards and the interest rates and use of those, and credit reports if you get to the point of eventually investing. Certainly a big thing to learn about is issues with lending and giving money, and releasing financial information to others. So those are two that kind of go to, can affect relationships or your safety, in that order. So the lending, giving, relationships can be affected, and the releasing financial information could affect safety issues. So be aware of those. Understanding the costs and cost context interaction when you first move to a new place, perhaps, or go away to college in a new town or city. I'm sure there's going to be probably the convenience store, right, around the corner. And so if you're going there for every item you need, rather than maybe once in a while making a trip to the larger grocery store, or maybe even the big box store, you're going to spend a lot of money unnecessarily on the increased cost for that convenience. So keeping that in mind. And that ties in with needing to really advance your awareness of the value of items or the value of service, what you should be paying for things. In some cases, you may need some negotiating skills that may come in more in like negotiating terms at work and things like that. Communicating with loved ones about finances, going out and buying a house without consulting your spouse, that could be an issue. And what are the resources that are out there for assistance? I think at some point there's going to be a program done on financial management. Certainly this is not an area of expertise for me as a psychologist and neuropsychologist, but it is an area of independent living skills that we help young adults and teens assess their skills on to see where they need to maybe kind of get some further input. Other things is preparing for independent living. You want to assess skill area that need further development, as I keep mentioning, allow time to increase the skills in the areas needed. So when you're at the point where you're going to go off to college, go off to grad school, go off to your own apartment, move maybe halfway or fully across the country away from your family, who's possibly and hopefully has been really supportive and helped you with a lot of different things to this point. When you're doing that, there are going to be so many changes. And remember, I said changes equal stressors. So there's going to be so many changes / stressors on you at that time, even though they're all positive and exciting. It's a lot to process. So that if at that very same time, you're also trying to suddenly learn how to, cook a meal for the first time, or operate a washing machine for the first time, that's going to be just like too much. It's going to be overload. So doing these things, learning these things before you actually are in that situation is pretty much the way to go. So, and keep in mind, these are learnable skills. You want to prioritize the areas that you still need to learn. Do an honest assessment. Where am I with this skill? Where am I right now? We call that your baseline. How good are you with that skill right now? That's your baseline. And then make a plan to learn to improve it, to learn more about it. And you should probably break that down into little parts and kind of just increase your knowledge and your skill or your talent, whatever it is, incrementally. Opera singers don't walk out on the stage and become a great opera singer, the first time they sing. They have to hone that talent and practice it. So start at your baseline and practice going forward. I already talked about breaking things down into their parts to help with that process and then putting it all back together. Don't be afraid to ask for guidance and know who to ask and use your resources. There's lots of good supplemental tools and materials out there. These smartphones alone give us so many options for helps with scheduling things, alarms to remind us of things. You can do task lists on them, but there's all other types of organizers, get a bulletin board, organizers, lists, whiteboards, whatever you need. There's lots of things that are can be helpful with once you're out kind of doing these things, even though you've already learned the skills, using supplemental tools or materials can be really helpful to implement them while you're out in your own place. If there's exceptions to things, try to learn what those exceptions are and consider a backup plan. And before doing the problem solving strategies, you want to try to do alternative thinking. So it would be like taking one item that usually has a specific purpose, like a paper clip, and thinking about, what else could this paper clip be used for? And just spending maybe a couple minutes just focusing on what could this be? How could this be used other than as a paperclip? And doing that kind of exercise with a few different items, that helps you to think of alternatives. And when you're going to do problem solving, that's going to be a really great a brain skill you have if you're able to kind of generate lots of different alternatives in your thinking. So higher ed, you know, a lot of these skills need to be developed because you're going to enter a whole new social world. Your parent who, you know, may have played a larger role in communicating with the school, has no role basically with communicating with your faculty at the school for the most part, if at all. So it's really on you. You're in a completely different environment. You're going to have to develop your own routines, your own structures, your own schedules. Being aware now and preparing by knowing your strengths, your weaknesses, your sensitivities, and how they might impact academics or campus life is really important. As I said before, knowing your medical or mental health care, and taking a practical approach to combining the educational plan with your professional goals. Remember, not every person is going to win, you know, one of these singing contests on national television. So we need to have plans that are practical also. And how good are you at assessing your stress level as you're going through all these positive changes? When you're looking at schools, size does matter. For many individuals, some will do very well, will thrive in a larger school environment. Others will thrive in a smaller school environment. And it might be the school itself or the class size, lots of different things. The dorm size, there's lots of factors to look at size. So size does matter. The proximity of school to home, for some that's important, whether they'd have to fly. And, you know, especially now, a lot of people have kind of realized with the pandemic and the quarantine restrictions, you know, what is the distance and is it okay to go out of state and how far, you know, in terms of transportation to get home? You know, what's the living situation going to be on campus? How many roommates are you going to have? Learning to set boundaries and respect boundaries are very important. I went through a lot of these others in terms of just general skills, but they all apply to being in higher ed, having access to campus support services, knowing what services are available, and also what social and activities are available for you to engage in. There's a lot of different social circles in college, and there's a lot of peer influence. There's going to be friendships, dating, mentors, all kinds of relationships. When you're in college and you're going to be responsible for navigating those relationships at a much higher level than you have to date, you're going to be making many more decisions and doing your own problem solving and coping. Being aware of expectations and consequences is really helpful. Thinking about your personal morals and your values and your ethics ahead of time, again, exceedingly important. What's your motivation? Why are you at this campus? Okay, you want this degree, but you can't stand this class and you don't want to go to this class. Well, they require this class for you to get your degree. So, you know, finding some way to motivate yourself to get through that class is really important. You know, being able to advocate or disclose if you need to is very important. And again, that asking for help. The independent living skills that we talked about earlier are really important when you go off to college. But the most important one probably is understanding the importance of personal space versus shared space. So there's shared space in the library, there's shared space in the classroom, there's shared space in the dorm, and understanding the norms and the expectations of, you know, shared space and respecting those norms and expectations, as long as they're, you know, acceptable and fit with your values, are very, very important to do. You know, yes, you want to be you and freely express you, but so does everybody else. And everybody has the right to have the shared space be livable and operational, you know, space that they can go to and function in. So let's see. If you're living on campus, some helpful resources are, oops, sorry, I thought I turned my phone sounds off. That's an alarm I'm using as an organizer. Transition to college also might involve living on campus. Know your resources, maybe your roommate, but be careful too not to over rely on your roommate for information. You want to establish a relationship that's collaborative with your roommate, not a dependent one with them. Your RA, hopefully there's a learning center, counseling offices, security, know what the campus has and where these people are. And then while you're there, create a daily routine as well as a weekly routine. And, so daily routine is for like your hygiene, you're preparing for classes, your meals, your work study, your homework and study time, your downtime, your self-care, your sleep wake, getting into really good exercise, stillness, etc. Really good routines versus your weekly routine perhaps, or monthly, where you're doing even more, checking in with your social connections, old and new, your family time, your laundry, changing your sheets and towels, restocking your supplies, things like that. And homesickness does happen because there's an excitement again, there's that change, that stress that we're going off, and it's so exciting to do this, to make this move, whether you're moving to a dorm or a new apartment or a new town. It's so exciting, but at the same time you get there and it's not going to necessarily immediately click with every expectation that you have. It takes time. You're going to need to adjust. You're going to get to know people and get to know kind of the norms of your community and get connected. It takes time. So, you're going to miss what you had, the comfort of the familiar. That's what homesickness is. It's missing the familiar, that comfort that comes from the familiar relationships, the familiar things, the familiar places. All of that is going to not be so readily available. So be prepared that homesickness can happen. Know that it's just part of the transition. It's part of the stress, and you need to then bring in the self-regulating and stress reducing strategies that we'll talk about next time. It's just part of how we kind of adjust or transition. When we move on to new things, we are sometimes leaving things behind, and we don't need to leave them all behind. Make plans how to stay connected to home and to those things that you value and miss from your home life. Same thing for the workforce. Think about, are you working, full-time, part-time? Are you just trying to develop work skills versus an ideal career? I really highly recommend that you volunteer or work temporary or part-time early in your life. You gain experience in the work culture, in what's expected in a work world, and how to take responsibility in a work world, which is very different than being a part of a family or a part of a team, or a part of a club you might be on in school. The expectations, the relationships, they're very different. So getting some familiarity before being immersed in the workforce full-time, getting some part-time or volunteer familiarity and experience, I cannot overemphasize how important that and valuable that could be for you. And because it also gets you familiar with the social facets of work, with engaging in new types of social behavior and navigating all these different relationships, because there's you and the employer, there's you and the CEO, there's you and your boss, then there's you and your coworker, there's you and the customer or the vendor. There's all types of relationships and expectations that go along with those relationships. We're going to practice developing and maintaining good working relationships, experience working as a team, which is, or being part of a system. That's a really great experience to have. It will help you increase self-sufficiency. You'll get an opportunity to practice lots of skills, lots of advocacy. You'll get increased exposure to other people, to diversity in thoughts, behaviors, viewpoints. You'll develop a sense of competence and self-efficacy and self-esteem, and maybe even develop your skills and your talents and your work ethic in important and significant ways. So it will help to increase your sense of autonomy. It might even give you an opportunity to shine in your job and broaden your horizons to try new or different things. This are the kinds of things you want to assess to see where you need to build skills again: your reliability, your self-presentation, follow through, mastery of tasks, contributing to a system, time management. A lot of these are in the skill list that I mentioned, but these are the kinds that are really important specifically to the work world, to kind of assess where are my skills on all these things, and do I need to kind of increase some of these, or am I really good at these and these are the things I need to pitch when I go in for the interview. Okay. Also, there's many other areas of teen and adult life that you'll be transitioning and growing and experiencing. So being able to, being required to advocate for yourself more often. If you do have something like a medical or mental health concern, you may be dealing with disclosure as well. Gratitude, how to use your leisure time. Relationships become, as I started out talking about at the beginning, much more complex. Your ability to kind of understand others in a relationship, to read them and respond to them becomes much more important. Busting stress in a strong relationship, having strong relationships, being connected to people is one of the best ways to decrease stress. Coping with different points of views occur. You can learn how to do that in relationships. Recovering from strains in relationships is an important facet of kind of being out and in different relationships, how to handle disagreements or conflict, and setting and respecting boundaries. That's going to be really important with roommate kind of relationships or apartment mate kind of relationships. And of course, safety, how to make sure that you're safe and you're avoiding being taken advantage of or manipulated or mistreated in a relationship. And then one of the amazing things that can be really awesome to give in a relationship is affirming the other people in those relationships with you. So that's another skill, I think, along with expressing gratitude within yourself and your world, can be really kind of brain healthy behaviors to engage in. So if you are struggling though, who are the support systems? Well, it's the people you know from your family, your friends, maybe a neighbor, maybe a religious source or professional resources would be more helpful. Look at your community. Are there library programs, health center programs, campus programs? At the workplace, there might be an EAP, they call them. Just find out what resources, if you're struggling in some area, can be helpful for you. And then there's always peer groups or self-help groups as well. This is the problem-solving model that I mentioned. We're a little over time, so I'm going to go through it quickly, where you first review kind of the skill, if you've already started to learn it, what you know about it. But then the next thing is you want to kind of explain. I'm sorry, you know what? This is the wrong model. I meant to put up the problem-solving model. I'm going to have to send that to Justin. So this is a different model. This is for skill development, but it's where you review the skill that you already learned. You explain what you're going to try to do. And this is when you're teaching a skill. So maybe you now have learned all these skills and you're trying to teach your younger sibling. You would model how to do it. You would then organize them trying it out. You'd have them try it out, and then you would look at how it turns out. So maybe you want to learn to cook. Maybe you ask a parent who is a good cook to kind of review basics of food with you, explain how to prepare a certain meal, show you how to do a certain task that might be more complicated in it, then ask them to allow you to maybe make that meal the next evening, organize it, set up a trial, and then everybody eats it, and you guys can, and hopefully you'll get positive reinforcement on that meal. So that's one way to learn a skill. I apologize. I thought I had put the problem solving slide in at this point, but problem solving basically is you identify what the problem is. You brainstorm without any judgment, all the possibilities of how to approach that. That's like the alternate thinking. Anything goes, no judgment. Then you go through all the brainstorms and you kind of look at pros and cons for each. You choose which one to implement, and then you try it out and you see if it works or not. And if not, then you have to go back into the loop and see where things might have faltered. So I know it's a lot, but this was really to introduce you to like what to think about in terms of where you can continue to grow and learn and best prepare yourself for launching. Like I said, it is a little bit stressful, and we're going to talk about that, which is a major area of my expertise next time. I hope you'll join us. And I want to thank the Ridgewood Library also for hosting this for you all. I can be reached with follow-up questions at West Bergen, which I gave the website, but my personal email is jmarron, M-A-R-R-O-N, at westbergen.org. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation. Honestly, there are like moments in it where I was like, yep, definitely should have done that when I was at that age, or did
I know
this,
there's
did
ones I'm
that.
like that
Yeah,
too.
yeah. So this was really great. Again, this whole webinar was recorded, and we will send out, as soon as we upload it to our YouTube, we'll send out the links as well as any other information. I'll also share Dr. Marron's email address in that email as well. And thank you all, and thank you everybody for joining us. We hope you had something to take away from this presentation. I know I certainly did. But thank you again for joining us. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.